So once you've got your files organized and you're ready to start working on the projects themselves, you want to go ahead and open up Photoshop. So there will be lots of different kind of versions of Photoshop. Again, you can go in your Finder and find them, but basically you want to open that up and you're going to get this kind of dialog box, and sometimes it'll talk to you about saving things on a cloud, which you want to make sure you save your things on that thumb drive unless you really know what you're doing and you want to use the cloud to organize your stuff. So, if you just get to this point, you can just click New File. And it's going to give you lots and lots of options, right? And so it's really important to understand what all these numbers and everything over here mean. And so the main thing, the big mistake that a lot of people make is they'll work on something at too low a resolution and they'll go to print it out or blow it up, and it'll look really bad. It'll look really, I call it JPEG'd. It'll look kind of chunky or blurry, because your resolution here is set to be 72 pixels per inch instead of 300. So if you're ever going to work in like print, or you think you might want something that's higher resolution, or if you're going to zoom in really close on a few things, like if you're going to like try to like build a background image that you then want to pan around on or zoom in and out on, make it just a really high resolution. Like change this resolution to 300 pixels per inch. You'll see these presets up here. There's things like, if you're going to work at a 8.5 by 11 size, it'll automatically click that resolution to 300 for you. But again, like you want to work, bigger, and if you want to see what it looks like in pixels, you can click there, and that'll tell you, okay, this is actually going to be a 3,300 pixels high versus 2550 pixels wide, right? So that's a pretty good high resolution thing, and you can change all these measurements here from inches to pixels and stuff. But so that's just if you're going to work in print. If you're going to go with film and video, which is what I'm working on right now, you're probably going to want to just stick with like a HD kind of a size as if you're a beginner. If you really know what you're doing, they have all like the 4K things and stuff like that down here. But I'm just going to click here on this one. It's going to keep it at 72 pixels per inch. It's going to make my color mode RGB, so there's different options for that. Like if you thought you were going to go to color and print this out on a color printer, you probably want to work in CMYK color and not in RGB. But if you don't know what you're doing, just keep everything here all kind of the same. Don't mess with anything, and just click create, and you're going to get a sort of a square that looks a lot like this one that has your guides. So these are like, if you're working in film and video, there's like title safe versus action safe kind of guides that'll happen because all monitors display things a little differently. You can squish things, and so this just tells you, hey, everything inside this inner square should show up on any TV, right? So it can be kind of useful. But if you don't like that, you can always go up here into let's see, I think it's view, and you can see there's the options here for your guides, and you can go in here and just go clear guides. So view will kind of changes how the stuff in the windows are displayed for you. So go down here to guides, go to view, and then just go clear guides, and that'll get rid of them. So this will be the format. It's kind of a classic video format, 16:9 aspect ratio. So what we want to do now is we want to go ahead and save this before we do anything else, right? So you want to go in here and go to File and go to Save As, which is what I always recommend you start with. And then we're going to go to that thumb drive that we placed, right? So I'm going to go down here. I'm going to go to my Photoshop animation, and I'm just going to title this whatever you would like to, so it helps you remember. So, and sometimes I'll do things like add like dates at the beginning, just because these things can really get stacked up. Sometimes you'll have like different naming conventions you want to use, but anything that will help you know what the heck you're looking at, and if you ever go searching for it, helps you find it, is really important. So you're gonna like put the name in, and then it's gonna give you options down here for format, right? And so you want to be really careful and thoughtful about this. Like if I just save this as a JPEG, it's not gonna save any of the layers or any of those things, right? And these are all different kinds of file formats that you can choose. JPEG is a great one if you're going to flatten an image out and put it on the web, or email it to someone to check it out, or like you just want to flatten something down to print it. But probably the one that you're wouldn't mess around with anything other than a Photoshop file at this point for us. So this will save all of our layers, all of our effects. It just saves everything kind of as it is. So go ahead and select Photoshop, make sure it's in the right place, and click Save. Now you've saved your project to that thumb drive, and then you can always hit Command S or go up here and go File, Save. And what that'll do is as you go, it'll just save your project. So most of us who work in these programs reflexively hit Command S or Control S, whatever it is. On a Windows machine, we're just constantly saving because it's just like habit. So you want to make sure you save and back up your stuff so that you don't end up losing it, right? And if it crashes and you haven't saved for an hour, that can be a real heartbreak. So make sure you save often. So that's the basics of setting up, opening up your document, setting it up, making sure it's the right resolution, the right color mode, the right size, and make sure you save it. And then beyond that, we have these just some basic kind of guidelines for Photoshop. Photoshop is probably the most complicated program. Maybe After Effects or some of these other ones are equally as complicated, but Photoshop just has a lot of stuff that it can do, and a lot of windows that you can kind of open and close, and it can get really, really confusing. So this is how I like to try to describe it to people. You have your tools over here. So Photoshop has a ton of tools. That's one of the kind of difficult things about it, is there's a lot of stuff there. You have like kind of workspace palettes, so you can have multiple kind of files open here. If you're working on multiple things, you'll see those up here. But you have the tools, and then this little bar at the top tells you what is that tool, what are the parameters of adjustments that I can make to that tool. So let's say I pick something like a lasso tool, and I kind of just do something like this in there. This allows me to feather it and change it. If I change to a different tool, like let's say let's go with the brush tool, and if I hit, you can see how this is now giving me a whole bunch of new parameters that I can adjust on that particular tool. So every single tool will have its own set of like things that pop up here. So the tools, this little adjustment bar, you have what I call palettes, which are just these things that float around out here that again show you different items that you can adjust or things you can do. So there's palettes, and then there is menus up here at the top. And sometimes the menus and the palettes and the tools they're just different paths to getting to the same thing. So it's good to keep that in mind if you're ever lost and you can't figure it out. So let's say that you really wish you can't find the layers palette anywhere, like it disappeared, you accidentally closed it. You can always go up here and go to Window, and you'll see all the palettes show up here as options that you can check. So if I'm looking for the layers, I can click the layers and it'll pop that one forward for me right over here. So that's a really good thing if you're ever lost. Remember, Window will show you whatever it is that you were looking for. View will also change like some of these things, like you can see guides like we were looking at earlier, or you can zoom in or zoom out, whatever you would like to do. And then the other thing that you are going to want to make sure that you're kind of like paying attention to is this idea of workspaces. So if I go in here to Window and I go to Workspace, there's a lot of workspaces you can choose. So let's say you were doing mostly photography work and adjusting photos. There's a preset workspace that brings the palettes that Adobe thinks you're most likely to use. They'll be right here, right? And then other things that you might use are hidden under these little drop down, or these little kind of sort of squares. So if you click on them, it'll open them up. You can rearrange them, like how I wanted to bring the adjustments layer up, palette up here, and group it with a histogram and navigator and all that stuff. I could do all of that. So workspaces are like presets for you. So essentials is kind of the classic basic thing. You can go in here and use, like, if you're going to do a lot of painting, it's going to bring you the stuff that it thinks you need for that. So there's lots and lots of options that you can do, and you can also create and save workspaces, like custom ones. If you want to, you can go down in here and make a new workspace, and there's lots and lots of things that you can do. So those are more advanced things that you probably want to play around with more as you get a little bit more experience. So that's the basics of the work area and the workspace, right? So just remember, save your file often, trying to get the hang of all the little like sort of windows, there's just a million little options here. Oh, one last thing I forgot to mention is that sometimes when I'm describing what we're looking at, you'll see there's this little this little square in the corner of a palette that will, if you click on it, it'll give you a whole bunch of new options. I call that the hamburger. So it's just like, it's kind of like, a hamburger or a sandwich over here. It's just an easier way. So if you're ever lost and you can't find an option, you can just click the hamburger and it'll often give you options within that palette. So there are also little things that sometimes we call twirl downs, where you can twirl down in deeper into an item to change parameters and stuff. So twirl downs and hamburgers are a couple of things that you want to look out for. So that should give you enough to kind of get started there. I would just play around a little bit with some of the workspace settings, see what you can find, and then get ready to actually start importing your objects into the screen.